Hello, once again, this is Melanie Main. Welcome to Bill Russo's Short Story Theatre. Today, we will take a walk into the world of the paranormal. That is the world where Bill saw a strange creature from the woods, that many people have said, was a Pukwudgie. A furry little thing, about 3 feet tall that spoke an eerie language that was similar to English. In today's episode, Bill examines a number of strange cases of the paranormal. Most of the tales presented today take place in New England, the oldest part of the United States. It is an area of small towns and cities, with one large city, a settlement, that the European settlers called Tri-Mountain, after the hills and mountains surrounding the town. Over the years the hills were brought down, as buildings went up. The only hill left today is Beacon Hill, and Tri-Mountain is now called Boston. Boston is also home to one of the tales you will hear today on Bill Russo's Short Story Theatre. Now, here is Bill.
Thank you, Melanie. Although there's a lot of talk about the paranormal, most people have never actually seen a ghost or a UFO. They certainly have never seen a spectral version of Lizzie Borden walking around the city of Fall River chopping off heads. They've never stood in the middle of the Bridgewater Triangle, and then, as they were walking along, were confronted by a 4-foot-tall, pot-bellied, hairy little creature waving its arms and saying, "Kia, Kia, Iwancho, 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 to, Kia, come here. Come here. We want you." And undoubtedly, they've never seen the eerie wall walker of Taunton State Hospital, who crawls on all fours up the walls of an inmate's room and then walks across the ceiling until reaching the bed of the patient, where it stops just above the victim's head. But these are major cases of the paranormal, the extreme cases. These strange occurrences of major paranormal happenings are seen by a fairly small group of people. And yet, every day, many thousands of people have a small paranormal experience, and they don't even realize it. Perhaps you too have heard of something strange and seen something strange, but you may be totally unaware of it. Okay, before you say, not me, let me ask you a couple questions. Have you ever awakened in the middle of a dark night when the house was as quiet as a frozen pond in winter in a painted picture? A late night or early morning, when no birds are singing, no church bells are ringing, when no wind is gusting or old pipes banging and rusting, no cars driving by, no airplanes in the sky, no sound at all. And then suddenly you hear, for a moment, you are startled. Is someone in the house? Has a burglar broken in? Hey, that sound came from no mouse. You hold your breath and listen carefully. There is no other sound. But clearly you heard something. "Ah, the dishes," you say, following a thoughtful pause. After you washed your dishes and dried them, you didn't put them away. That's what it was. A coffee mug just slipped its mooring and crashed into a dish. That's what it was. At least that's what you wish. You calm down after solving the mystery and you go back to sleep. The next morning, you get up and go into the kitchen. You reach for a mug in the dish drainer in the sink to make a coffee to start your day. But it is empty. When you washed the dishes, you dried them, you remember, and put them all away. In your rush to get ready for the day's work, you forgot that in the middle of the night you told yourself, that noise was just a coffee mug left in the dish drainer that slipped and banged into a dish. Yes, that is what you wish. Welcome to the world of the paranormal, my friend. Well, you say this has never happened to you. Perhaps you are correct, but maybe it happens frequently and you are simply not aware of it. Some of us spend much of the night suspended halfway between slumber and wakefulness. We are awake and aware for a moment, then surrender to sleep again for a few minutes before once again partially rousing from sleep to being half awake. It is during the half-awake time that dreams and reality are blended, and very often it is difficult to determine which is which. Perhaps you dreamed that the coffee mug crashed into the dish in the middle of the night. It is possible that the coffee mug really did crash into the dish. But you think that it was a dream. You hope that it was a dream, is what I mean. Welcome to the world of the paranormal, my friend. There are things out there that do not obey the rules. They do things that cannot be done. There are creatures that cannot exist, but they do. When you wake up in the middle of the night and silence covers all, listen carefully. For in the stillness of the darkness, you may be surprised at what you hear. And if you are halfway between sleep and awake, you may doubt what you hear. And in the morning, you'll convince yourself you really have nothing to fear. Welcome to the world of the paranormal. Well, now, from way up north at the top of the United States in Aroostook County, Maine, comes an account of the falling lamp. Deep into the night, at the darkest hour, halfway between dark and day, a lady and her husband are sound asleep, and then they hear this. But it was not a crashing coffee mug that hit their ears. Thoughts of burglars and robbers fueled their fears. But when they saw what it was, they were moved to tears, for it was an heirloom lamp that had burned for 100 years. It slipped off the dresser and fell to the floor, where it lay broken into 100 pieces or more. They agreed to tend to it in the morning and sadly went back to sleep until dawning. But when they woke up and looked at their heirloom, gone was every bit of their sad gloom, for the lamp had indeed fallen down to the wooden floor, but was in perfect shape and not in pieces anymore. To this day, they cannot explain it. Welcome to the world of the paranormal, my friend. In another part of New England where the paranormal seems to be a little more active than just about anywhere else, comes this little story. Except by water or in an airplane, the only way to get to the island of Cape Cod is by train over a bridge, or by car over one of two ancient bridges that were built in the third decade of the last century. Cape Cod is a popular vacation spot for millions of tourists. It is also, like Florida, a place where old people, if they are lucky, get to retire. Such is the case with Mr. and Mrs. X. Heading up to the July 4th weekend, they were hosting some of their grandchildren for the holiday. So here now is the strange tale told by Johnny X, one of the grandchildren.
All of us kids loved staying at the big cottage on Cape Cod, with our grandmother and grandfather. They seemed more like kids to us than adults. They let us have fun without giving us too many rules. That summer, on my first night there, I think I was 11 years old at the time. I woke up in the middle of the night, when my cousin Bobby said, "Wake up, Johnny. Let's go play hide and seek." Well, I looked for Bobby all over the cottage, on the first floor, down in the cellar, the second floor, and even in the attic. Bobby kept talking to me, and he said, "Don't quit, you're close. Keep looking." I kept looking for an hour or more, and Bobby spoke to me from almost every room in that big house. As it got near morning, I got scared that something had happened to Bobby, because he had not said anything for quite a while, and I was afraid something happened to him. I went into my grandparents' room, just as they were getting up to make breakfast. I told them something's happened to Bobby. We were playing hide and seek, but he has disappeared. My grandfather looked at me, and then he said,
"Johnny, Bobby is not here. He is not coming to the house until tomorrow."
Welcome to the world of the paranormal, my friend.
Well, ghosts can be very frightening. At least that's the way they're almost always pictured in television, books, and movies. A real-life ghost may be totally harmless and not be a life taker. It might even prove to be a life giver. Lizzie Borden's second home in Fall River was a fancy one. She bought it after her wicked stepmother and stingy father were chopped up by an axe murderer. As to who killed them, I shall name no names, but I suspect if we were to take the shoe of the killer and stuff Miss Lisbeth's foot into it, it would be a perfect fit. But she was no Cinderella. Well, anyway, Lizzie did move out of the parents' house and into that second home. She called it Maplecroft. And she lived many years in Maplecroft, leading a quiet life, quiet and solitary. It had to be, because she was shunned by almost every person in Fall River and indeed the whole state of Massachusetts and most of Rhode Island. Almost everyone believed that she was indeed the axe murderer of Fall River. So poor old Lizzie had to buy her friends. They were mostly servants that she had to greatly overpay in order for them to overcome their dislike for her and remain with her in Maplecroft. Now, in death, Lizzie seems to have simmered down quite a bit. She's apparently become a gentle person. She has reportedly been seen walking around Maplecroft now and then. A friend of mine owned Maplecroft back in the 1990s. She sold it not out of fear of Lizzie, but because it was creepy living in a house where things would move from room to room on their own accord. Shades would be drawn during bright days by unseen hands who wanted to stay in darkness and did not like the light. But not once did my friend say that the ghostly happenings were ever things that were designed to harm her. So these days, Lizzie Borden seems content to live in her house on a hillside in Fall River in peace and quiet, with little actual interaction with new owners and visitors to Maplecroft. But some ghosts do reach out to people and help them. Here's a case in point. We call it the end of the tunnel. There is a tunnel in Boston under the harbor that is named for a United States hero of two wars, the Second World War in the 1940s and the war in Korea in the 1950s. And besides being a highly decorated fighter pilot, he was perhaps the greatest hitter of all time in baseball, Ted Williams. He played for the Boston Red Sox his whole career. Now, this story comes not from Ted Williams, but from his tunnel, where it is said that one time there was a tall, spectral person standing inside the tunnel, standing in the middle of the road as cars rode by him, and some cars rode right through him. But they did not harm him, of course, for his appearance was ethereal and not from flesh and blood. This strange creature was also invisible. He could not be seen except by the young man who lived to tell this story. Several years ago, that particular youth was sitting in the front seat of the family car next to his father, who was driving through the tunnel, that tunnel named for Ted Williams. At the time, most cars had seat belts, but there was no law that said you had to use them. And a great many people back then did not buckle up for safety. The pair in our story were among that group that did not choose to use seat belts. Well, as the young man tells it, they were just about in the middle of the underground highway when suddenly the faint glow at the end of the tunnel seemed to get brighter and larger. It grew in size and intensity until he realized that he was not in the middle, but he was at the very end of the tunnel. He said there was an extremely tall man in front of him, and that man started speaking to him, not moving his lips, but talking telepathically. And here's what he said.
Do not be afraid. Take my hand.
Mister, please tell me. Am I dead?
No, it is not your time yet. You and your father are about to be in a terrible wreck at the end of the tunnel. It is your fate. You will be in the crash, and you cannot avoid it. But it is not your time to die. Buckle your seatbelts and you will stay safe.
Then the tall, gaunt, spectral being vanished, and the boy and his father were back in the middle of the tunnel driving 30 miles an hour towards an uncertain fate at the end of the tunnel. Just a few hundred yards away. Instantly, the boy started to buckle up his seatbelt, and he screamed at his father, "Buckle up! Buckle up, Dad! Buckle your seatbelt!" There was something in the tone of his voice that compelled the father to comply, although he had never, not once, ever driven with a seatbelt. At nearly the exact moment that they buckled their seatbelts, they reached the end of the tunnel. Their car was struck by a speeding full-size van, flipping the car 3 times in the air. When it landed heavily, it rolled over 3 more times on the pavement in front of the exit from the tunnel. The driver of the van died just a few seconds after the horrible crash. The car with the young man and his dad was upside down. Inside, the boy and his father were suspended upside down, fastened to their seats by those seat belts. Those seat belts that previously had gone unused. Never used until the warning from the tall, gaunt man. And thanks to that heads up, the boy and his father both had nothing more than minor injuries. Witnesses to the crash said that the driver of the van was moving at a high rate of speed and that he did not have his headlights on, and that may have been a factor in the crash. It was also learned that the driver of the van, who was killed almost instantly, was a wanted man. He was on the run from the law. The police had multiple warrants for his arrest.
Welcome to the world of the paranormal, my friend.
This is Melanie Main, back again for Bill Russo and Short Story Theatre. You've been listening to Bill, sharing some stories from the world of the paranormal. Some of the stories were presented exactly as they were told, others were adapted for the purposes of the podcast. We changed names and details but stuck pretty close to the original paranormal accounts. Are these stories true, or are they merely imaginative tales spun to prod the imagination of the listener? Well, my friends, we do believe they are true, but we also know that not everyone will agree to that, and that, my friends, is part of the allure of the stories. Welcome to the world of the paranormal, my friends. Join us again soon, for more stories on Bill Russo's Short Story Theatre podcast, available on all podcast sites.